A very good morning to all of you. Myself, Dr. Charu Sharma. I'm Associate Professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. The topic for today's CGR is Fetal Medicine at AIIMS Jodhpur, a small but significant oasis. So now I will be covering the topic under the following headings: Introduction to Fetal Medicine, Prenatal Screening for Aneuploidies and Single Gene Disorders, Genetic Counseling, Prenatal Diagnostic Procedures, our experience at AIIMS Jodhpur, and the future prospects. So now, what is fetal medicine? Fetal medicine is actually a subspecialty of obstetrics which deals with the care of the fetus as a patient. So it basically aims at treating the unborn fetus. It is beyond ultrasound. It is comprehensive evaluation of the fetal health. It is meaningful interpretation of findings, critical decision making for optimizing the fetal and maternal outcome, planning diagnostic and therapeutic interventions, and optimizing the timing of delivery. So if we look back to the history of fetal medicine, we cannot imagine without remembering this great personality. He is Albert William Liley, who did the first intrauterine transfusion in 1963 to correct fetal anemia. And this is regarded as the first fetal treatment in the history of fetal medicine. And from here started the evolution of this special branch, the fetal medicine. This is a book which was published in 1998 by Monica J. Casper, and it is related to the making of the unborn patient, dealing with all the social and ethical issues in fetal therapy and fetal surgeries. And looking forward to the modern fetal medicine, this is Professor Kipros Nicolets, a pioneer in fetal medicine and has contributed a lot by founding the Fetal Medicine Foundation, starting the diploma in fetal medicine, and he is the one who gave the concept of nuchal translucency and the lemon and banana sign in spina bifida that we commonly see. So now why fetal medicine is important? Because there is a huge burden of genetic disorders in India, especially because of its large population, high birth rate, and high incidence of consanguineous marriages in many of the communities. So this is just a glimpse of the congenital anomalies, and it has been reported that every year around 5 lakh infants are born with congenital anomalies, with more than 20,000 babies with Down syndrome and more than 10,000 with inborn errors of metabolism. So there is a felt need for fetal medicine. And since we are concerned with the genetic disorders, so basically there are 3 types of genetic disorders, and these can be numerical, which includes the structural defect in the chromosome, that is the number of the chromosomes may be altered, and these are known as aneuploidies. So if the number is increased, these are, that is for example trisomy 21, there is 1 extra chromosome, and this is known as Down syndrome. Similarly trisomy 18 and 13, or there can be Turner syndrome when 1 X chromosome is deficient. Then there can be loss or gain of large segments of genome resulting in submicroscopic copy number defects, that is microdeletions or duplication syndromes. Then there can be mutation of a single base pair to ranging from a single base pair to less than 1 kb size, resulting in single gene disorders. So aim of fetal medicine is basically to identify these genetic disorders timely and to prevent these genetic disorders so as to provide happy babies who are developmentally, neurologically, and physically sound. So for this, early diagnosis is important, and for early diagnosis, we start with the prenatal screening. So the screening starts right from the maternal age, because advanced maternal age is responsible for many of the genetic abnormalities, especially aneuploidies. Then screening for the maternal medical disorders like diabetes, hypertension, SLEs, etc. Carrier screening of parents for known diseases or mutations like thalassemia. Family history of known genetic disorders or single gene disorders, developmental delay, and inborn errors of metabolism. History of structural abnormalities like congenital heart disease, consanguinity, recurrent abortions, unexplained intrauterine deaths, stillbirths, previous IUGR. So if we take a proper history and proper screening, many of the conditions can be identified. Now, what we follow in our OPD, the prenatal screening tests. So, there are a lot of screening tests, but we will be confined with the aneuploidy screening and the screening for single gene disorders. So, we have for aneuploidy screening, the screening starts right from the first trimester, and we have biochemical screening methods and the ultrasound-based screening methods. So, we offer the first trimester combined screening, which includes the nuchal translucency between 11 to 14 weeks of gestation, along with a panel of biomarkers, which includes pregnancy-associated plasma protein A and this beta HCG. And if suppose this period is missed and the patient comes late to us, then we have an option of offering a second trimester biochemical screening, which includes the beta HCG, unconjugated estriol, the alpha-fetoprotein, and the inhibin A. So these screening methods, basically they give us the risk. What is the risk of aneuploidy in that particular pregnancy? And we have to counsel the pregnant patient that all pregnant patients have a background risk of aneuploidy, and by doing these prenatal screening tests, we are modifying that risk to identify the high-risk cases so that appropriate confirmatory or diagnostic tests can be offered. Now, which is the best screening method? That basically depends upon at what gestation the patient has arrived. If she has come in the first trimester, then obviously, as you can see in the graph, it is the first trimester screening, which includes the maternal age, the biochemical markers, and the nuchal translucency, which gives around 95% detection rate for aneuploidies. And if she comes in the second trimester, so we can offer her the quad test. Now, the types of prenatal sonographic abnormalities. So ultrasound also is one of a very important screening method, and there are soft markers. Soft markers are nothing but these are certain changes in the structure which may be normal variants in 5 to 10% of these scans, but sometimes they may be associated with increased risk of fetal aneuploidy. And if aneuploidy has been ruled out, then these soft markers, they do not have much significance. Then the structural abnormalities can be ruled out in the anomaly scan, which we usually offer at 18 to 20 weeks. And there are increased risk of aneuploidies and other genetic syndromes if the structural abnormalities are present. Apart from this, the miscellaneous abnormalities like in fetal growth, liger or placental abnormalities may be there. So this is a list of the soft markers that we see on ultrasound, and each soft marker has a positive likelihood ratio or a negative likelihood ratio for the development of trisomy 21. And whatever marker comes in, then we have to calculate the risk. What is the risk for having a Down syndrome baby? And this overall likelihood ratio is then calculated. And this is the article which suggests, this was a meta-analysis of second trimester markers for trisomy 21. And from this article only, these likelihood ratios have been calculated. And this suggests that the presence of sonographic markers increases and the absence of such markers decreases the risk of trisomy. Then the second thing was the single gene disorders screening. So we know that among the single gene disorders, the thalassemia is very common in Western Rajasthan. And this is the article from our institute only, where the authors have highlighted the fact about the successful implementation of a screening program for beta thalassemia in order to reduce the financial burden. So for the screening that we follow in our OPD, if a patient comes and she is a carrier, then the husband has to be screened for the carrier status. And if suppose both are carrier, then the mutation identification is done, and we counsel the couple that since it is an autosomal recessive condition, there are 25% chances of recurrence in each pregnancy. The prenatal diagnostic test can be offered so that timely diagnosis of these autosomal recessive conditions can be carried out. Now, for these screening methods, it is very important that before the screening methods, we do the genetic counseling, because we have to explain the implications of these tests. And for the genetic counseling, I would like to invite Dr. Varuna Vyas from the Department of Pediatrics, and she will be telling you about the genetic counseling.
A very good morning, everyone. So, genetic counseling is the process of helping people understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familial implications of genetic contributions to disease. So, it involves interpreting family and medical histories to assess what is the chance of occurrence or reoccurrence of a disease in the family. Sometimes the diagnosis may be available upfront and the genetic testing of the index case has also been done. However, on most occasions, what we see is that a clear-cut genetic diagnosis has not been established for the index case. In that case, we have to first try and establish the clinical diagnosis as well as the genetic diagnosis of the index case to try to be able to help the couple who have come to us for genetic counseling. At times, it is also more difficult when a child who was affected has died. In that case, we have to explain to the parents that what are the options available now. We also educate them about the inheritance, testing, management, prevention resources, and the available research on that disease. And this has to be done keeping in mind the educational status and understanding of the couple that have come to us for counseling. And our job is to ultimately counsel them to promote informed choices. Our counseling has to be non-directive. We have to just explain to them what is the disease, what are the options available to them, and ultimately the decision has to be taken by them. So this involves pre-test counseling, wherein we counsel them before the test, as well as once we get the testing report, which can be of the index case of the mother or of the fetus, then we have to do the post-test counseling. And sometimes if multiple members are being tested sequentially, we may have to have multiple sessions of post-test counseling. So during the post-test counseling, we build up on whatever counseling we have done in the pre-test. So post-test counseling is best done by the same person who was involved in the pre-test counseling. And depending on the disease condition, we can involve more people from the team to counsel the couple regarding their genetic disorders. One very important step in doing this genetic counseling is creating a family tree or a pedigree chart. So which is a collection of genetic information with clear and consistent symbols. And it should be unambiguous, and it can act like a permanent record of genetic information, and only if there is any new addition to that, we can add it to the previous pedigree chart. So we advise the couple to keep that pedigree chart carefully, not to lose it, and we also keep a record with ourselves. And we specifically ask for infant deaths, stillbirths, miscarriages, or any symptoms that we are specifically looking for. And sometimes drawing a pedigree chart may be difficult when there is complex consanguinity, when there is consanguinity amongst multiple couples or in multiple generations. Again, we take details of both sides of the family, and again, it should not be directive when counseling, and we should not be implicating one side of the family for causing the disease. And usually we draw a pedigree of up to 3 to 4 generations. Less than 3 generations is not very useful, and more than 4 generations, the medical history starts to become inaccurate. And disorders may or may not follow a Mendelian pattern. And we must remember that even when they follow a Mendelian pattern, chance has no memory. So even the autosomal dominant disorder would have a chance of 50% recurrence, even if it might be seen in all the children, or it may be seen in none of the children as well. And there are a lot of non-genetic factors also that have important implications in fetal medicine. So we should try to make sure that we have ruled out other non-genetic causes and a clinical diagnosis established for the concerned condition. So we'll give a brief example of how drawing a pedigree chart helps. So this was a couple who came to us for genetic counseling. They brought their 5-year-old son who was affected with blindness, and they came to us because the mother was currently 8 weeks pregnant. So when we created a pedigree chart for the family, we found that none of the members on the paternal side were similarly affected. However, when we drew the pedigree chart on the maternal side, you can see that there are multiple male members who were affected. Some of them have died either due to age or due to other reasons, but we could see that there was still one male member who was alive apart from this child, and all of them, all the male members who were similarly affected were linked through their mothers. So, because all the male members are affected, it appears to be an X-linked recessive disorder. And if we consider that the mothers are probably carriers, so it clearly becomes an X-linked recessive pedigree. So at this stage, we are highly suspicious that this is an X-linked recessive disorder, and there could definitely be of a risk of recurrence in the current pregnancy. So we give the couple the option that they can first have the index case tested, which is their current 5-year-old child, and if we are able to identify the mutation in the index case, then the same test can be done in the fetus. However, all this takes time. So genetic testing, the tests usually take at least 4 to 6 weeks before we get the report, and we have only time till 20 weeks of gestation to terminate the pregnancy. So we have to explain all these options to the parents so that they don't waste too much time in decision making. Unfortunately, many times the patients will come to us very late in their pregnancy, and that stage we don't have many options to offer to them. So I'll now hand over back to Dr. Charu.
Thank you, Dr. Varuna. As Dr. Varuna rightly said, after the counseling, the ultimate choice or the final decision is the couple's to go for or not to go for testing. So after the screening, and the genetic counseling, if a diagnostic procedure is required, then what are the options? So the prenatal diagnostic procedures are basically the chorionic villus sampling, which is usually done between 11 to 13 weeks of pregnancy. Amniocentesis, which is done after 15 weeks of gestation, in which we collect the amniotic fluid and send it for testing. Chordocentesis is usually done after 18 weeks, in which the fetal blood is collected and then it is sent for the testing. So regarding the technique of amniocentesis, we basically require an ultrasound machine, and apart from that, we require the 10 ml Dispovan, the 22 gauge spinal needle, and the collection vials. This is how the procedure is done. Under the ultrasound guidance, the spinal needle is inserted into the amniotic cavity and the amniotic fluid is drained out. So this is a video in which we can see that a needle is inserted and it goes into the amniotic cavity. After that, the hub of the needle is, the stylet is removed and a 2 ml Dispovan is connected to it to discard the initial 0.5 to 1 ml of the amniotic fluid so as to avoid the maternal contamination. And then this is the ultrasound image where we can see the needle inserting inside. This is about the procedure of CVS, that is the chorionic villus sampling. Here you can see the placenta. So the needle is inserted here, and then the connector is attached to the needle, and then a vacuum is created by a 20 ml syringe, and then we move the needle to and fro so as to collect the chorionic villi, and this you can see the blood along with the chorionic villi coming into the syringe with negative pressure. So this is basically the collection of the chorionic villi, while in amniocentesis we were collecting the amniotic fluid. In this, we prefer that the placenta is anterior so that we can easily penetrate the placenta, whereas in amniocentesis, we prefer that if the placenta is posterior, we can have direct access to the amniotic cavity and we do not go inside the placenta. So after the collection of this chorionic villi, these chorionic villi is drained into the Petri dish so that we can add some transport media into the Petri dish so as to remove the maternal blood, and only the chorionic villi is collected and sent for the testing to the laboratory. This is about the fetal blood sampling. So we can see here, this is the placenta. This one is the umbilical vein, and in the similar technique, a 20 gauge needle is inserted into the umbilical vein, and then the blood can be withdrawn for testing. And the same method can be used if we want to give intrauterine transfusion. As we can see here that the blood is flowing in the umbilical vein. So now after these testing, we have done the amniocentesis, we have done the chorionic villi sampling, but now the sample has to be sent for which genetic testing. So it is very difficult to choose which testing has to be done. So it is just like the karyotyping is just like a library which consists of a different set of books, and we see the different chromosomes in karyotyping, the structure, the overall structure of the chromosomes. So we are not opening the book from inside, we are just seeing the structure. So it will show you the major things if there is any decrease in the number or addition of the chromosome or any major structural malformation, structural abnormality in the chromosome. The chromosomal microarray is just like reading the whole book, and in this, the small gain or small deletion in the chromosomes which cannot be picked up by the conventional karyotyping can be picked up by the chromosomal microarray. Clinical exome is just as we decide to read one chapter. For example, if we know the clinical condition of the patient, so we can order the genes sequencing for that particular condition. For example, if it's a metabolic disorder or a neurological disorder, then for the whole panel of genes for that particular disorders can be ordered. Then we have targeted sequencing or targeted testing in which we know what to find. Like in this, we have marked this particular word, this inversion and heteromorphic variation. So if we want to search this in the book, we can easily find out on what page number it is. Similarly, if we know the mutation or if we know the defect that we want to search for from the index case, it is very easy to find out that targeted testing, which can be done by Sanger sequencing or MLPA or FISH and QFPCR. FISH is fluorescence in situ hybridization. QFPCR is quantitative fluorescence polymerase chain reaction. So it is very important to choose the best genetic test which can give you the real picture of what you are searching for. This is the protocol that we follow. All patients undergo genetic counseling and then the procedure is done, whether it is amniocentesis or CBS. The amniotic fluid or the chorionic villi is then sent for the relevant testing, and the results for QFPCR and FISH comes in 48 to 72 hours, whereas the karyotyping, it takes time around 2 to 3 weeks. Similarly, microarray takes around 2 weeks, and the next generation sequencing, which includes the exome sequencing, whole genome sequencing, and the clinical exome, they take around 4 weeks. So after the test reports, the post-test counseling is also very important. So the learning points about genetic testing is that empirical genetic testing in prenatal cases is not useful without a known target. You cannot just keep searching the genetic data for answers in the prenatal period. In the absence of index case workup, prenatal carrier testing may be done. So now going to our experience at AIIMS Jodhpur. And this is the evolution of fetal medicine in our department. It started with our training at AIIMS Delhi and Hyderabad, and then carrying forward this branch and creating the awareness among the people of Rajasthan regarding the facilities available in our institute. We have done many CMEs, and this was the last CME that we organized in March 2021. And this was the World Down Syndrome Day celebration, in which we invited the parents of the babies who had Down syndrome, and we made them aware about the prenatal screening and the testing methods which they can opt for in their next pregnancy. And I am happy to share that AIIMS Jodhpur is the only government setup in Western Rajasthan where prenatal invasive procedures are being carried out. We did our first case in April 2019, and since then the curve is rising. The number of referrals have markedly increased in the last 2 years, not only for the procedures, but also for the preconceptional and genetic counseling. This is a breakup of the prenatal invasive procedures that we did in the last 2 years. A total of 120 cases have been done, with maximum cases of amniocentesis and the few cases of chorionic villus sampling and the intrauterine transfusion. These were the indications of prenatal invasive procedures that we did, and the most common indication was the patients who were screened positive for aneuploidy in their screening test. The others were the ultrasound abnormalities, the single gene disorders, the absent nasal bone, previous babies having with Down syndrome, previous baby with Klinefelter syndrome. For the diagnosis of thalassemia, and 3 of the patients, they opted the test because they were having advanced maternal age. These are the chromosomal abnormalities that we detected in all the cases that we had done. There were 6 cases of Down syndrome that we detected, 2 cases of Turner syndrome, and in 4 cases, the aneuploidy was not there, but there were some structural rearrangements. And this is the profile of the mothers with Down syndrome fetuses. So this shows that age is no bar. It can occur in 21 years age pregnant female, and it can occur at 44 years of age. So these cases, they came at different gestations, and then it was very difficult to see what tests we can do, we can offer them, because all these tests, as Dr. Varna has also told, it take time for the reports to come. And then we have the limitations for the medical termination of pregnancy. So we have to see which tests we are offering, and proper counseling is required. So this case 1, which was at 26 years of age, she presented to us with ventriculomegaly, intracardiac echogenic focus and protruded tongue, and echogenic bowel. There was no screening test available with her, only the ultrasound report was available, and she came at 19.4 weeks. So we did the test, and this is the image of the baby showing a protruded tongue, and she had this mild ventriculomegaly, echogenic bowel, and this was the karyotype report that came showing trisomy 21. So because this patient came at 19.4 weeks, so we also ordered for the QF-PCR. This is the molecular test which gives the report for the 5 major aneuploidies, that is trisomy 21, 18, 13, and the sex chromosomes aneuploidies. And the report comes within 48 to 72 hours. This was done so that if any abnormality is there, we can take a quick decision based on this report. And there are papers and articles which compares this karyotype and QF-PCR, and they have suggested that this test is not supplementary to this karyotyping, but it's a complementary test, because what we can see on QF-PCR cannot be determined on karyotyping, and what we can observe on karyotyping cannot be found with QF-PCR. Like with karyotyping, maternal cell contamination may occur. So if we send only for karyotyping and this contamination occurs, culture failure occurs, we will not be able to get the report. So this does not occur with QF-PCR. On the other hand, the chromosomal rearrangements, the structural rearrangements, the translocations and mosaicisms, they cannot be detected by QF-PCR, but they can be detected by karyotyping. So this is another paper which also highlights that in countries where large-scale conventional cytogenetics is hampered by its high cost and lack of technical expertise, QFPCR may be used as a first-line prenatal diagnostic test. And besides these abnormalities, we had observed that absent nasal bone was seen in 15 of our cases. So 3 cases I have already discussed. These 3 cases with absent nasal bone, they were diagnosed to have Down syndrome. And among the other 2 cases, now this case 1, this patient had absent nasal bone, but because of lockdown, she could not come for prenatal testing. So she had a preterm delivery, and postnatally we sent the karyotype of the baby. There was no aneuploidy, but there was some structural rearrangements on chromosome 1 and 15, but it was not very clear whether there was any gain or deletion of the gene. So the chromosomal microarray was ordered, and that was normal, and it was good for her because this patient had already 7 abortions. So this was a very precious pregnancy for her. This another case, again this patient came at 19 weeks with absent nasal bone. Both the testings were done and they were normal. The karyotype was normal, but again this patient had preterm delivery, and on delivery the patient was found to have a non-immune hydrops fetalis. So this patient is still in the ward and under evaluation, and the neonatology team is suspecting congenital nephrotic syndrome. So we have sent the patient, testing of exome sequencing, because already the chromosomal analysis has been done. Now some other cause may be there, so we have sent the sample for exome sequencing so that we can get some diagnosis. This is the image of the baby with gross fetal ascites and scrotal edema. So regarding absent nasal bone, it is very important to note that 2 to 3% of the euploid fetuses, they have hypoplastic or absent nasal bone at first trimester screening. So we must keep in mind the ethnicity and the parental phenotype also. And if their overall risk is low, then reassessment should be done at 16 weeks. And beyond aneuploidy, absent nasal bone may be associated with some microdeletion syndromes. So we must offer microarray rather than conventional karyotyping for these cases. Now this is the spectrum of patients of single gene disorders that were diagnosed in our institute, and we did the prenatal testing for these cases. These were with the family history of homocystinuria, with the homozygous mutation in mitochondrial fission factor gene, the previous baby with Pompe's disease, the previous baby with clinical suspicion of metachromatic leukodystrophy, previous baby with Tay-Sachs disease, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and many more, and especially the thalassemia cases, they have been detected. So now just a quick look on some unanswered cases. This was a case who came with recurrent non-immune hydrops fetalis. So as we can see in all the pregnancies, this couple had non-immune hydrops fetalis. Although all the pregnant babies are surviving, and no genetic testing was done except for the karyotype in second baby, which was almost normal. A small rearrangement was there on chromosome 9, which was not significant. So this patient came to us at 18 weeks of gestation with pericardial and pleural effusion. Amniocentesis was done. We planned to do exome sequencing because this was a case of recurrent NIHF, and we knew that karyotype may not give us all the answers. But because of the cost and financial constraints, the patient could not afford exome sequencing. So we sent for the conventional karyotype only, which was normal. The echocardiography at 22 weeks was also normal. This patient was then lost to follow-up due to COVID, and then came in the emergency at 40 weeks of gestation and had non-immune hydrops fetalis. So again, we were nowhere, we did not have a diagnosis why again this NIHF has occurred. So exome sequencing could have given us the answer. So this is the image of that baby delivered, and we noticed a peculiar finding that in the nails, the picture of just like ectodermal dysplasia was present. So we called all the siblings of both the siblings of this baby, and the similar nail findings were there in both the babies. So just we could make the differentials, but the exact diagnosis could not be reached. This was another case of recurrent cystic hygroma. this couple also had one spontaneous abortion and one stillbirth at 28 weeks of gestation for cystic hygroma. Again, this patient came at 18 weeks of gestation, late referral, amniocentesis was done, chromosomal microarray was done, this was normal. Then we asked for the fetal echocardiography and a detailed anomaly scan further, and which mentioned about the fetal akinesia syndrome. It was just suspected. So this couple then went away and got the pregnancy terminated at some peripheral health center, and he has sent this image to us. And again, because of the financial constraints, he refused for the further genetic testing of this fetus. So exome sequencing again could have given us the answer, but unfortunately we could not get. So we published an article in Taiwanese Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology regarding the prenatal evaluation of cystic hygroma. Is there a need to revise the protocol? Because in both these cases, the first one we had sent the karyotyping, and in the second one we had sent the chromosomal microarray, which is mentioned in the protocol that the structural abnormalities have to be ruled out. So we just tried to find out that if exome sequencing could be done as the first line testing to decrease the cost burden and to have better answers. So this was published recently. This was another case of mitochondrial fission factor gene mutation. This couple also came to us at around 18.5 weeks with a report of whole exome sequencing because the previous baby had cerebral palsy. So they had got this report done outside, which showed this MFF gene mutation, and this was clearly mentioned in the variant of uncertain significance. But this couple was adamant and he wanted the prenatal testing of this present pregnancy. So despite counseling, we did the prenatal testing. At the same time, we did the Sanger sequencing of the parents also. So it was found that the mother came out to be homozygous for the same mutation and the father was carrier. So the mutation was running in the family, but the mother, despite being homozygous, was phenotypically normal. And the fetus report also came out to be homozygous for the same mutation. And this is the baby who was delivered because the parents, they opted for continuation of the pregnancy. And this baby is fine till date. So this article was also published, and it was just mentioning about the dilemmas for prenatal diagnosis. Sometimes the patient's expectations, they befuddle our clinical decision. And this is just to highlight that all mutations are not pathogenic. Some mutations can be variants of uncertain significance. Fetal medicine is a ray of hope for many couples. This is the pregnancy that the couple had a consanguineous marriage. The previous child died due to suspected Tay-Sachs disease. Another child in the couple's extended family had confirmed Tay-Sachs disease. So in this pregnancy, the chorionic villus sampling was done at 13 weeks and this was sent for clinical exome. The fetus was found to be the carrier of Tay-Sachs disease. So at least this was relaxing for the couple that the baby was not affected, and this couple has not yet delivered and is expected to deliver in the next month. So this was again a publication which was done by the Department of Pediatrics of the sibling, this couple's sibling that had died because of Tay-Sachs disease. So they have found a novel mutation in this fetus. This is another case which was referred recently by Dr. Aliza to us, and this couple had 4 losses, as we can see here, and the clinical condition in all the cases were the baby is delivered at preterm at 36 weeks, had nephrotic syndrome-like picture. So this was the index case in which the exome sequencing was done and a mutation was identified in the homozygous form. This baby expired at 3 months of age, and then the same mutation was tested in this existing baby. the same mutation was identified in the homozygous form, this baby also expired at 8 years of age. So at least now we could counsel this couple for prenatal testing of fetus for the same mutation in next pregnancy. And we have also given the option for pre-implantation genetic diagnosis because she has already lost 4 babies. So there are a lot of challenges in fetal medicine. Decision challenges, that is the diagnosis right to do or not to do a procedure, timing, what procedure to do. Technical challenges are there regarding the access to the fetus, the difficulty in doing the procedure because of the placenta lying anteriorly in case of amniocentesis, or there is an anterior wall fibroid, or is an obesity. So all these technical challenges are also there. Apart from their laboratory challenges, sometimes the culture failures occur, the laboratory reports are not available, and a long waiting time for the reports. The other challenges are regarding the counseling and the ethics and the evidence. The RCTs are very difficult to do in such cases, so we are based upon anecdotal cases, case series, and personal contacts. So what are the future prospects? So we have discussed about the screening and the diagnosis. So the future lies in fetal therapy, the fetal surgeries. So fetal therapies include intrauterine transfusion. This we are already doing, but we expect to do more and more of the procedures so that the patients get the benefit and they are not being referred to other places for these procedures. Then with twin pregnancies, there are a lot of complications, multiple pregnancies. So selective multifetal reduction is one thing that we expect to do in the near future. Then in twin-to-twin transfusion syndromes, to destroy the anastomosis, we can do the needle laser or the radiofrequency ablations. And there are many things that can be done as fetal therapy, like treatment of ventricular tachycardia, fetal goiter in the prenatal period that we can do in the near future. And this requires a multidisciplinary approach, and it requires a team of a genetic counselor, a fetal medicine specialist, an obstetrician, fetal surgeon, pediatric surgeon, a neonatologist. And what is the role of an obstetrician? The obstetrician plays a key role in coordinating all the events right from screening, diagnosis and management, and unifies and brings together this team as a unit. And we hope in the near future that the Nidan Kendra that is established in our institute, supported by the Department of Biotechnology under the guidance of Dr. Kuldeep Singh sir, we will be able to offer these tests in our own institute. So this will further decrease the financial burden on the genetic testing. And the take-home message is that fetal therapy begins with fetal diagnosis. Adequate and appropriate screening is what we need because prevention is better than no cure. Knowledge of the condition is must, and the possibilities of treatment have to be explored. So I acknowledge the Department of Pediatrics, especially Dr. Kuldeep Singh sir and Dr. Varuna Vyas for their extensive support in all the genetic cases, genetic counseling. I acknowledge the Department of Diagnostic and Interventional Radiology, Department of Pediatric Surgery, and the Department of Pathology. So with this, thank you all. And if you have any questions, you can ask.
Thank you, Dr. Charu and Dr. Varuna, for such an excellent presentation. I have a couple of questions which I have typed in the chat box. You can go through one by one and please answer.
The question is that how you deal with 18 weeks presentation with triple marker suggesting Down syndrome. I would like to tell that triple marker is actually obsolete now because the sensitivity is very less, and still if the patient comes to us with a report of triple marker suggesting Down syndrome, we can very well counsel the patient and give the option about prenatal diagnostic procedure because she has come at 18 weeks. So options we can give her about the non-invasive prenatal testing also, and regarding the confirmatory prenatal diagnostic test also. And we have to counsel her that NIPT, which is the non-invasive testing, is again a screening procedure. And if by chance the report comes out to be positive, then she will lose that window of 20 weeks where the termination can be done. So I would counsel her for the prenatal diagnostic test, that is amniocentesis. And then we can send the sample for both karyotyping and the QFPCR or the FISH, so that we can get the report within 2 to 3 days. And if it comes out to be positive, then the timely termination can be done according to the patient desire, if she wishes the termination. Considering the sensitivity and specificity of the test, how you deal with syndromic baby on birth with insignificant findings on screening?
So if the baby is already delivered and he is suffering from a syndrome or whatever it is, now the baby has to be raised with a positive attitude and he has to be taken care of, optimizing his outcomes. So we try to find out what are the comorbidities, treat them, and eventually try to have the best outcome that is possible for that child. So even if it is missed on screening, so there is and the baby has been delivered, now we have to work with that, and optimizing his outcomes.
The next question is, what if the patients are unwilling to continue the pregnancy? So it is very likely that if the patients are unwilling to continue the pregnancy and they are in the time frame of this medical termination of pregnancy, that is 20 weeks, we can offer them MTP. And recently the new act has come on 25th of March 2021, which has said that this time limit of 20 weeks can be extended to 24 weeks. But still the act has come, but the rules and regulations are still to come. Because they have not clearly mentioned in what specific abnormality the termination can be done beyond 20 weeks. So unless the rules and regulations come, we are following the old act only, that is till 20 weeks. And if the patient is in that scenario, then we can very well offer this MTP. Does MTP guidelines of not permitting termination for this indication contribute to illegal abortions? Yeah, definitely there are cases, but that is why to decrease these illegal abortions, the new guidelines have come. And otherwise also, if the patient has crossed that limit, he has the option to go to the court and take permission from the court. Because Down syndrome is not incompatible to life. So it is the choice of the couple that if they want to terminate, they can take the help from the court and legal procedures can be done. Do such parents need psychiatric counseling too? Yes, definitely these parents need psychiatric counseling, and that is the importance of post-test counseling. Because once the report comes and it is positive, the patients may be in different behaviors like anger, grief, guilt. So we have to counsel them that it is not their fault. It is this can occur with anyone, and then we have to tell her the options available and what behavioral therapies and what support groups are there. So that has to be counseled to them, and definitely a psychiatric counseling is required.
Thank you, Dr. Charu and Dr. Varuna.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, what are the chances of fetal damage loss during CVS? During chorionic villus sampling, the fetal damage or the loss of fetus or the abortion is around 1 to 2%. Whereas in amniocentesis, this loss is about 0.5 to 1%. Dr. Anil has asked, where are we sending the samples for karyotyping or any chromosomal or genetic or molecular testing, and what is the cost? So right now we are outsourcing this because we are sending the sample outside, and in the near future with the establishment of the Nidan Kendra, we will be able to do all these testings in-house, because we have Dr. Kuldeep Singh sir and the team has procured many of the equipments, the microscopes for the karyotyping, the ddPCR machines, and many other equipments have been procured, and in the near future we will be able to do them in-house, but right now we are outsourcing.
Regarding the costs, Dr. Anil has asked, so whether we are sending to government sector labs or private labs, well, most of the times we're sending to private labs, but there are some government labs like CDFD in Hyderabad which are also doing some of the tests. So depending upon the tests and how urgently we need the report, because like I said, the time is an important factor, we decide on which lab to send, and the cost for karyotyping cost is between 2.5 to 5,000 depending on the lab, and for chromosomal microarray cost is somewhere between 12 to 15,000, and for clinical exome sequencing again cost is around 12 to 15,000, and if the mutation is already known, then the cost is little less, somewhere around 5 to 7,000 depending on the gene, depending upon the lab and how early we want the report. So even the cost is little high, but it is not prohibitive. Most patients, especially comparing it with the cost of raising this child and the emotional burden that comes with it, the costs are not very high. So any specific ethnic group in Rajasthan which are commonly affected based on available literature or experience? Would say that many in Rajasthan, especially any group or anywhere else, any group that has got a lot of consanguineous marriages who is likely to be affected, and families or ethnic groups which are not consanguineous but which are highly inbred. That is, they would not marry within relatives but would not marry outside their community, can get affected.